very different businesses, right? You've got Eater, you've got Rezzy, and now Blackbird. And what's interesting is like each one changes the way restaurants connect with diners. I would argue it's a contrarian's position is what has led to this, especially within what is common practice within the industry. There are all these limiting beliefs, right? Like it is the way it is and it can't be any different because it's been around for thousands of years. Um, I've got to believe that it's all rooted in a specific belief or perspective on the industry. What is it that helped you create all three of these businesses?
Well, I think first of all, I am somebody who believes that the future will not look like the past. We need to understand the past, of course, to build the future correctly, but I am a strong believer in the future, in evolution, in progress, in the future being a solution to the problems of the day. So I fundamentally believe that the restaurant industry of the future is going to be better, brighter, more robust, stronger, more resilient, and that we will get to a place where restaurants are in control of their own destiny. Now, as to how we get there, I think that's an interesting question. And I think a lot of what we're thinking about now with Blackbird is how to empower restaurants to make sure things in the future don't look like things in the past. Because I think that a big problem that exists now, and I think hopefully I'm answering your question, but I think the real sort of the challenge of the work is that restaurants get sort of rooted in the systems they have. It's really hard to run restaurants. They're understaffed, even the really good ones. And so change is hard. It's fundamentally hard. And so we get set in our ways, and we build muscle memory around things that aren't necessarily great. But I think the industry is on a good path, and I hope that Blackbird is helping to get it there, because we strongly believe that if we give restaurants back some control of the tech stack, of their businesses, of connectivity with consumers, then things will turn in their favor.
Do you do you think that the past reflects that? I mean, I'm sure your Instagram feed looks very similar to my Instagram feed, which is like you just sign up for this service and you're going to get busier, right? Right. If you let us build your website for you, you're guaranteed to get busier. And they throw out all of these keywords. Um,
Yeah.
is is this an industry where independents want to be independent? Or do you think at this point they've been conditioned to be reliant on solutions that they don't understand? Because inherently, if you gave them independence, they would then be responsible for what they do with that tool.
Well, I think independents want to be independents, but I think independents don't want to have their own CTOs and their own data scientists
For
and their
sure.
own CMOs. I think some can, in some, in one way or another, can have these people in house. But I think part of the nature of independent restaurants is that we can't staff them with all these people. The stat that to me is so cleanly and completely indicative of where we are is, 42% of restaurants weren't profitable last year. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that? And also the need for people to understand like sophisticated marketing and sophisticated data and analytics, and who understand how to build technology. I think the answer is independents want to be independent, but they need to partner with the right companies and the right resources so that they can run their business and they can start to get some scale out of the technologies and the know-how that exists more broadly, in these industries.
I feel like you picked a really interesting niche. I think that there are two foundational issues within the industry, right? There's new customer acquisition and then there's customer frequency. But
Yeah.
new customer acquisition is like the hot thing, and it's been that way for roughly 2,000 years, right? It's the crack cocaine of our industry. It's just pervasive. Nobody wants to talk about frequency, which was the solution I think inherently Blackbird is looking to solve. What are your beliefs around customer frequency and why that's the path you chose to go?
I mean, we do think, Josh, that it's a little bit of both. I think that the thing about frequency is the most expensive part of marketing is customer acquisition.
For sure.
The cost of retaining and getting the customer to come back, that's much more inexpensive, relatively speaking. So the more repeat business you have, the better. But I think you kind of do need to think about top of funnel, finding new customers and the repeats, and that, like, those two things together is what's going to be the business unlock.
And so, what is Blackbird's approach to that? For those that don't know, can you explain what the solution is?
Well, we think the solution is loyalty and payments. Loyalty is something that now is, I think, something that everyone kind of talks about and restaurants are thinking about. And if you ask 10 restaurateurs, do you think about loyalty? 9.5 will say yes. There's a very, very small handful of restaurants around the country that aggressively eschew loyalty, and they somehow figure out how to do it. But most restaurants agree completely that loyalty matters. So Blackbird is a loyalty platform. We give restaurants fundamental tools to help them connect with customers and get them to and help them turn into repeat customers. Really, the simplest piece of that, the most important thing we have is points. And so the more you use Blackbird, the better your points and your rewards get, the better your access and benefits get, the more magical your experience at restaurants. And the idea is that this currency that we have, Fly, is in the hands of restaurants to use as they wish. It's user acquisition and retention currency, and we're seeing restaurants start to use it in really, really cool ways.
Are you coaching on that? So much of what we do in the industry, I think, is built around transaction, right? That moment when you're standing at the salad place that will remain unnamed, and they're like, "Oh, you earned a free salad today," and you just kind of shrug your shoulders because you didn't come in for the free salad, right? You don't love them anymore because you got the free salad.
Yeah.
Um, what is your approach to loyalty? What do you think it actually looks like in practical application?
Um, I think it's definitely about rewards. It's definitely about value. We have a lot of custom tools that restaurants can use. And if you're really thinking in great detail about loyalty and rewards, and you want to reward a fourth visit with an extra entree, and a fifth visit with a round of drinks, and a seventh visit with free dessert and a table touch, Blackbird can set that up for you. The platform allows for that. What we have found over now thousands of restaurants is that most restaurants are not really equipped to think about it in that kind of granular way. And what they need at the end of the day is a way of just saying, this will be worth your while if you come in today and try the restaurant. And if you come back next week, it'll be even better. And so that really shows up to consumers as rewards, and over time, access. And access means both at the individual restaurant level, where a restaurant can say, we see that you've been here twice, 3 times, 4 times. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to get in, but also at the Blackbird level, because we think if we can teach our consumers, the Blackbird customer and Blackbird Club member, good habits, those will trickle down to restaurants. So the more people are using Blackbird, the more our restaurants benefit alongside us. So it's sort of happening both at the individual restaurant level and also at the Blackbird.
How much of this, I mean, how much of this was influenced by your time working with credit card companies? The reason I ask is because when I look at a model for loyalty, I don't think anyone does it better than credit card companies, right? Because it's a commoditized product. They're loaning you money at high interest, right? But there's status and access to the inaccessible and all of these things that they use to differentiate what is a very banal product offer.
Yeah, so I think that definitely. Look, I was at American Express for a year and a half after Resy to sold to Amex, and I learned a ton. Amex is one of the great companies in history, and when you spend time inside of the machine, you understand why it's so successful. But I do think that one observation would be that Amex and Chase Sapphire and products like that, the loyalty is calibrated to the card, and that's the business. And often restaurants are beneficiaries of that loyalty. And when you look at, for example, how the $400 dining credit performs for individual restaurants that are part of Rezzy's network, I think if you ask those operators, they'd say it's huge. It's a huge win for them to be part of that. The question, though, is how do we make sure that every restaurant, to some extent, has the same tools? And a lot of this is about really leveling the playing field and empowering restaurants to do the things that they want to do. Because those programs, they're ultimately like for fairly small subsets of the total population of restaurants. And you take that and you look at what large scale players like Starbucks are doing. One of the things I think is really interesting if you're trying to kind of get your head around what's going on is just go into the the iOS App Store and look at the top 200 apps in food and drink. It's almost all restaurant brands, especially the top 50. It's restaurant brands. What that says is like the big brands are really getting a ton of leverage when it comes to branded loyalty. And so when you have the big credit cards doing it and you have huge restaurant companies doing it, the independents are kind of left underserved and at a disadvantage. And I really think that's the essence of what Blackbird is after, is to give those restaurants the tools, so that they also can be in control of their own destiny. Because at the end of the day, independents are the lifeblood of the industry. All of the creativity, all of the enthusiasm, all the passion that exists on the consumer side, it's for the independents. The independents are the ones that thrill us. We may get a more consistent experience from Starbucks. Whenever I'm in an airport, I get Starbucks because I know what the product's going to be. And by the way, they have a 10 out of 10 world class app. But the lifeblood of the restaurant industry is the independents. And we need to give those guys tools to make sure that they can continue to operate and can, back to where we started, can find profitability in the future.
I want to talk to you about your thoughts on like altering versus influencing consumer behavior. I feel like so much of the industry and the marketing around the industry is built around trying to convince people to do things they don't want to do. Right? It's this Tuesday night fallacy where it's like, I want to get people to to come into my restaurant on a Tuesday, not realizing that the hurdle isn't convincing them to come to your restaurant. It's convincing them to like get off the couch and put on pants. It's like, right? And so the way that you do that is by giving away all of your shit for free, right? Like there has to be this really high give in order to get them to do something they don't want to do. One of the interesting things about Blackbird is it doesn't seem like it's trying to alter consumer behavior. It's just trying to influence consumer behavior, right? If you're already going out, if you're already ordering, if you're already doing this thing, just do it with us. And it seems like a cheaper, more accessible value prop.
I think that's a reasonable take, but I don't have quite the the pessimism around altering behavior either, because I think the other way to think about that is there is a clearing price for the seat, and if it's above break even, then the restaurant would rather have somebody in the seat. Maybe you're not going to go out to spend $100 a head on a Tuesday night, or and that's a New York price, or $50 a head, wherever you are. But you might spend 25, and if 25 is the number that gets the restaurant to break even, everyone wins. Now we have to figure out how to market that and merchandise that, because nobody wants to be sending out coupons all day long. That's a bad thing for brand, and it ultimately is going to do more harm than good. But there is a clearing price for a seat, and if that price has a customer willing to pay it, and that transaction leads to the business being healthier, and that cover is break even versus at a loss, I think we should be pursuing that path and figuring out how to create a solution there.
Profitable growth.
Yeah.
Strategically.
Yeah, for sure. That's the dream of every restaurant.
I mean, it is, right? But the reality is, I think the struggle for most independents is, this dynamic between more work and more money. And the problem is that they look identical on the front end, right? But you really only figure out what you did, when you get your P&L, whenever that is for some restaurants. And so are you guys able to guide people through the process? Like when people are leveraging Blackbird, Is there any guidance around profitable growth?
Well, we sort of work it backwards to some extent. We say, if we can create a reward here, if we can say, you're going to get 3x or 5x or 7x back right now, or in some cases more, you'd fill that seat. And we have statistics, we have data to show that we can fill the seat, and that would be, a $20 investment, and that makes sense. And so we coach restaurants in that way for sure. I think good restaurateurs though understand this math. I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree that it's this business where you're spending all your money before you open the door, before you turn on your lights, and so your business is the business of triaging money that's already spent, right? So that feels tough in a lot of cases. Easier on Saturday than on a Tuesday, but I do think restaurants more and more do have a handle on what it's going to take. And I think that most, when I look at how restaurants are modeling out their performance and trying to make projections, a lot of it's on a per cover basis. We can say, if we can do a turn and a half tonight on a Tuesday and 2 turns on a Saturday, we're good to go. In New York, it's one of the challenges of the big city markets is that you kind of have to do all these turns all week. And that's what makes them so difficult. It's not they can't fill the seats on Saturday. It's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday challenge. But I think operators have a handle on that. And again, I think if they can have simple tools that start to move the numbers for them, I think that they welcome that. They welcome that.
Let's talk on peak versus off peak, because I would assume everybody gets into it and like everybody's like, all right, let's crank Mondays, let's crank Tuesdays, right? But I think that the real opportunity for most is, are you getting 2.5, 3 turns on Friday, Saturday, Sunday? Because if you're not, and that's when everybody's out, that would seem to me to be the priority issue we should solve before we begin looking off peak. Um, what does the data say when you guys look at all of that?
Well, the data says that you need to be thinking about both number of covers, which is what I just said,
Yep.
admittedly, but also average check. And the real businesses are the ones that have some ability to drive covers 7 nights a week or 5 nights a week that you're open, and also variation in average check, so that you can see towards the second half of the week as demand builds, you're making more money per cover. That's when you're getting from the restaurants, you cross the chasm into profitability, and you can start making money, as you know. But it's a little bit of both. I think step one is break even. So, fill as many seats as you need to for break even. Step two is start to sort of create some daylight between your average check on Tuesday versus Saturday. And that's where you can start to see real profit.
How has Blackbird evolved? It was interesting because it was kind of born in the era of blockchain into what is like an AI driven world. I would assume like owning a tech company, like it's a very good time to own a tech company, only because like you're able to iterate, it scales so quickly. There are just so many tools that are available to you today that there haven't been before. How from concept to today has Blackbird evolved over the last several years?
So Blackbird is really kind of two businesses that are working together. I think I increasingly kind of think about Blackbird as an ecosystem. The two big blocks are loyalty and payments.
Right.
And our starting point for this was to say, can we use blockchain to create a net new payments network? And look at what's happening with the world of tokens and stablecoins and blockchain tech when it comes to ledgering and composability. And will that lead us to a path where we can build a net new network for the restaurant industry that will work? And so the answer is resounding yes. And that's the payments part of the business. And in the next handful of months, what you're going to see us do is finally take what has so far been a lot of talk, frankly, and deliver against that promise. And so our network, which we call Flynet, is going to start to open up and be composable and open up and be something that developers can use to build things. So you're going to have access to our 2,500 restaurants, 2,500 going on 25,000 restaurants. You're going to have access to our base of customers. You're going to have access to the loyalty currency as something you can use to create programming and to compose against. We have projects that we've been developing internally that we may spin out around certain parts of the experience of running a restaurant, for example, private dining. And so the network is going to start to be something that the restaurant industry has as a composable payments platform. And that's going to be incredible. That's something that, the banks have, like VisaNet and MasterCard and American Express are all big, humongous, obviously, transaction networks. And American Express is something that Amex can control and build against, but obviously is closed. Visa operates slightly differently, Visa and MasterCard, because they're not exactly in the flow end to end the way American Express is. But we're really excited about how this network is going to become something that restaurants have in their hands and in the hands of developers to develop against. So that's the first part of the business. The other piece is loyalty, which is what we've been talking about, and that is the sort of branded Blackbird business. That's our app. That's our discovery ecosystem, and that's going to start to now develop in its own way. You mentioned AI. I think we're super excited about how AI starts to factor in terms of discovery and in terms of identity. Not to mention how it allows us to ship product and the pace of play that it brings with it. But they're really kind of separate businesses, and so the question, it's evolved quite a lot. It started as we're going to kind of do this payments thing for the restaurant industry, and we're not exactly sure how it's going to work. And it's evolved to this place where we see this really awesome loyalty platform that restaurants are using, and we see this payments product and platform that's starting to develop. And I think it's really exciting times, and we'll see where we go from here.
Are you not sleepy? I mean, look, last time we spoke, like I caught you like on the back end of your time at Amex, and it was literally like from one to the next to the next to the next. I don't even
Yes.
know how quickly you made the Blackbird announcement after your last day at Amex. Like what drives it? You know what I mean? At this point, it can't be personal income, Ben Leventhal. So like what is it that inspires you to push forward and build what I would argue are big things, right?
Um, I love this industry, and I love huge challenges and big problems. And I think, um, if anyone's going to solve it, hopefully it can be me.
And do you think the payments part of it is probably the least interesting in that it's the most conventional part of the business, right? But doesn't it solidify kind of everything you're doing because it gives you like steady, consistent income, and that's the play. It's also an identity play, right? Because that's also the data where all the data is coming through.
Yeah. So I think we've actually we've evolved our thinking on this, actually, to be totally candid. And I think where we started is we sort of felt like we have to own the entire ecosystem end to end. In kind of startup parlance, we have to boil the ocean. We got to own the payments end to end. We got to own loyalty end to end. We got to be super dogmatic about how people are paying. We got to, get people off traditional rails. And I think our position on this has evolved a great deal, and we now believe that Blackbird should coexist with things that are out there, and we probably shouldn't be quite so dogmatic about where the payment sits. As long as we can be in the flow of the transaction experience, and we can give the customer the data that it needs, right? That he or she needs, both to make a decision, but also to continue to have their profile being updated. And we can give restaurants the data and tooling they need to make good decisions, to make use of the product. So yeah, I think that's a change for us. That's sort of like I think hopefully we'll wind up having gotten to a place where we're a little more sophisticated than we started in terms of how that works. Mostly because we don't want to be too disruptive to restaurants. And as we've spoken to restaurants, and if we've made our way to kind of figure this industry, the payments industry out, and how we can fit in. Uh, I'm a strong believer that you can't really ask restaurants to change too many things, and you kind of, you got to sort of more or less be adherent to the existing steps of service and training regimens. And so, I think it's fair to say that Blackbird has become a lot more user friendly in that way. And hopefully, we're taking a slightly lighter touch when it comes to being prescriptive about how the entire stack could work, and focusing on the things that matter most to the restaurants.
You say 2,500 going on 25,000. And what I don't want to do is diminish the number 2,500 because market penetration is impossible. It's that Shark Tank proposition. There are a billion restaurants on the planet, and if I just get 1/10 of 1%, I'll be a trillionaire. And then people realize it's really fucking hard, right? Because the industry is so stratified that if you want 2,500 restaurants on your platform, that's probably 25,000 conversations, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the fact that you've achieved the level of market penetration you have, I think, is very, very admirable in and of itself. I'm sure that no different than when things go poorly. You're like, why, God, why? This is going really well. Why? Why do you think in this moment, restaurateurs who have been opposed to technology and paying for a new solution, and Lord knows there's a lot of tech solution fatigue out there, why have you been able to achieve this level of traction?
Well, I think it's two things. One is, as compared to where we were 10 years ago, there's no question in my mind that restaurants are way more amenable to new technologies than they were before. And they are way more open to the idea that technology could be transformational for business. I think we've gone from restaurants being fundamentally analog to a place where they're fundamentally analog in hospitality experience, but could be powered by technology. And that's huge. That's, as somebody who has spent his career building tech and trying to convince restaurants to adopt it, that's huge. That makes life a lot easier. As it relates specifically to Blackbird, this is not a rip and replace pitch to the restaurant. We're not saying you have to replace your POS. We're not saying you have to make a change on reservations. We're not saying you have to make a change on reporting, payroll, anything like that. Blackbird sits alongside those systems and is extremely lightweight from an implementation standpoint. So, anyone who's sold anything into restaurants will tell you the hardest sale is POS. The POS sellers, their quotas are like 3 units a month. And they're psyched if they can do 3 units a month consistently. The reservation sellers, those guys are happy at like 10 deals a month. And, they're probably fine at 8, Blackbird, we quota around 15. And that's as much. We have rock star sellers here, of course, and we have what we think are good systems, but it's also not a rip and replace, which is why it's helped us to go fast. Which is how it's helped us to go fast.
When you get on a sales call, the proverbial you, but I'm sure at some point you were sitting on sales calls as well. I think the hardest thing in the world is to sell something where you have to explain the problem and then explain why you're providing the solution. Talk to me about visibility in the market. Like when you talk about payments, when you talk about loyalty, when you get on the phone with independents, are these front of mind for them, or is there part of the sales process where like you're actually having to explain this is where I think you're leaving money on the table?
I think that actually is where the challenge is, because it's not a system they're familiar with, because it's not something as monolithic as POS or reservations. I think that the problem is a little bit less top of mind for them, for sure. And it used to be in the olden days, Amex was going and selling into restaurants and saying you should be an Amex accepting merchant. The bundling of processing, Square, Toast, more than anyone, the bundling of processing so that a restaurant signs up for Toast and they accept all the cards, because it's completely changed the way credit cards sell to restaurants. You have to be a very large scale player to be talking to a Fiserv or somebody like that and making your own processing deal. And so, very much Blackbird is more in that conversation of you should accept Blackbird than it is in the conversation of you need to install Blackbird because it's solving X, Y, and Z. So that actually is the essence of where we have to do our work on the sales side is exactly that, and sort of explaining why Blackbird is solving a problem and how Blackbird is going to lead to a healthier business and more covers and more revenue and more repeat customers and ultimately better economics. But I think it's a really good question, and it does speak to where there is a challenge in sort of introducing net new things actually.
Here's what I hate about your business. And I hated this about Rezzy as well. I just think it's so hard. It's that, you're trying to acquire customers, or you're trying to acquire restaurants, but then you also have to acquire customers, patrons simultaneously. And it's very much chicken and the egg. And that's why you see the failure rate for marketplace-esque solutions. The failure rate is through the roof. And so, as someone that's done it twice now, how is your perspective so different that it's not like you had just like one W on the board, but like now we're tracking, Ben?
Um, well, there's like very smart people that write whole books about two-sided marketplaces, and one piece of wisdom that I always that has always resonated with me, and I do think about is any marketplace has an easy side and a hard side, and in terms of growth, and the trick is figuring out which is which. And obviously, the hard side with Rezzy was actually the supply side, because you had restaurants who were terrified of switching. And so when we could crack the code on that and we built the product the right way, the consumers followed over a period of time. I think Blackbird is different. Blackbird is easy on the supply side. It's very easy to grow our network, relatively speaking. And where we have to focus is on the consumer side. But I think the point is, if you can understand which the hard side is, you can focus on it. And you can, you can grind away on it, and you can, try 1,000 things and figure out what works. So that's sort of the general answer is you got to understand which side of the market is the hard one, and be obsessed with that and be relentless about cracking the code on it. Obviously, if you don't have a business.
I think that Blackbird is a fantastic program and platform, which is why I wanted to have you on the show. Also, a great opportunity to catch up. But I've also been obsessed with loyalty for more than 10 years now. And the reason is, I want to walk you through this thought process that I had when I was walking my dog one day. Ultimately, what I decided was that people don't have a loyalty problem, they have a memory problem. And the way that I got there was I'm walking my dog and I'm thinking, like, why don't all the people that love my restaurant come back? Why don't they come back often? And we had tried a variety of offers and a variety of campaigns. I think I've always been a marketer at heart, so it was always about iteration. And then I thought to myself, well, what would happen to my restaurant if everybody that came in infrequently came in once a month? And what if everyone that came in once a month came in twice a month? And then I thought, like, how hard would it be to do that? And then I thought to myself, well, how often do I think about my favorite restaurant, like the one I don't own? And the answer is never, ever. I never think about my favorite restaurant in the world. And then I think about the ones that I own. What's that?
What is your favorite restaurant?
My favorite restaurant in LA closed. But it's my favorite restaurant here in Encinitas is probably Valentina. It's a very good independent restaurant.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Josh.
No. It's there are a lot of great independent restaurants here in North County, San Diego, and so many in Los Angeles. It's the thing that I miss most about Los Angeles. But I'm trying to track all this because I'm trying to figure out in my own mind. And so I'm thinking to myself, how often do I think about my favorite restaurant? The answer is never, because I'm busy. Because like I have a career and a life and a wife and a child and a family and all of these obligations. And then the third question I asked is kind of changed everything for me, which was, what would my favorite restaurant have to do to convince me to come back? And I think it's the magic of Blackbird, which is just remind me that they exist. I'm not really motivated by discounts and freebies. I appreciate it when it happens. I mean, you're in and of the industry, so you appreciate when you go to a place and they give you something that's off menu. It's just a gesture. It didn't influence why you came to that restaurant, but it certainly influences the experience you have while you're there, creating deeper affinity. I think one of the most effective uses of Blackbird is that it surfaces restaurants that you already love. It reminds you that they exist. Because again, I don't think it's a loyalty issue. I think they're very loyal to restaurants. I just think they forget. And I don't think that the news cycle is about, what is tried and true. I think it's about what's new and different. So it's easy to be forgotten. Does that resonate?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's what the big players get from their apps is being top of mind. That's why you get all those push notifications from Starbucks because you got to be top of mind. I think in fine dining, a large part of it is around access, and not everyone has a favorite restaurant that's hard to get into, but everyone has a favorite restaurant that involves some amount of logistics, even if in some cases it's walking in, but in a lot of cases it's not. So I think being top of mind and understanding how low friction it is to be a regular is really important. For me, the restaurants that I wind up going back to over and over again are both awesome. They check three boxes. They're amazing, local, they're close by, and I know I can get in. And it's got to be all three. And that's exactly how we think about it, and how how a restaurant should be using Blackbird is to say, let's stay top of mind. Let's make sure that we're focused on locals because locals are easier to convert. And let's make sure they know how to get in. Let's make sure they have a direct line to us. And so, yeah, I think that is the way to crack the code on it.
Let's talk about the third for a minute, because I think that's a really interesting feature. And I think it's something that we as an industry have a tendency to discount. To give you a false equivalent or potentially a true equivalent, depending on how deep you want to dive. I think that the magic of Uber is the map, not the car. I think it's an expectation of service. I think that generally we don't want to go anywhere unless we know how well we're going to be taken care of. And I think that what I've seen as a restaurateur over the course of the last 10 years is that technology has made it increasingly easier for people to do whatever they want, whenever they want. And if you fall outside of that, you're automatically excluded.
Yeah.
Same?
I totally agree.
I love that. Look at us becoming best friends. Let's talk about the big, bright future for the industry. You started off talking about that. I am very much of the same mind. I think that with AI and automation, what you're going to see is you're going to see headcount go down, wages go up. I think cost of goods is going to drop dramatically because robots are driving trucks. And the thing I'm most excited about is the ability to better serve our guests through what I would describe as like hyper personalization at scale. I am the guy that when like Apple had the update where Facebook had to say, like, do you want us to use all of your data to better market to you? I was like an emphatic yes. It's like, sell me things I will like. And I think that that's true of many consumers. Talk to me about your perspective on hyper personalization and how you see Blackbird playing a role.
Well, I'll take the counter on that one. Actually, I think personalization works up to a point, and then there's diminishing returns on it for the restaurant. There's a very interesting thing that I learned from a restaurateur friend of mine who's not a restaurateur anymore, but one of the greats. And his whole thing was the guest notes are not about the guest notes. The guest notes are about hospitality hygiene. And the guest notes are about servers and maitre d's and bartenders knowing that they're on the hook to learn something about the guest. So the guest note is not about the guest note. It's about inputting the guest note. So I think similarly, all those preferences, all that detail for the restaurateur, the benefit is the hygiene around it, is saying this is how much we're going to care. This is how focused we're going to be on who's at the table and who's walking through the door. I don't know that the guest needs you to know that they like sparkling water and that they, on Tuesdays like a martini and on Saturdays like a red burgundy. I don't know that you need that in your toolbox. But if you have that, and by virtue of that you can make better connections with customers overall, then I think it's great. I think the future is bright for restaurants because consumers love restaurants and they love them more and more with every passing second. And so when you have that much consumer demand and you have it growing at the pace that it's growing, then we have enough to work with. We can solve the problems. To your point, we can use technology to solve problems. We can crack the code on margins. We can figure out labor issues because we have enough top of funnel. We have enough demand to make it sustainable. So that to me is the real sort of answer. Like restaurants, the future is bright because of how much restaurants are beloved, and like I said, they're more and more every day. The other thing that is exciting to me is as much as you look at the model for the average restaurant, and when you look at National Restaurant Association's report, which is probably the sort of best source of this information, 2.8% margin on average, 42% of restaurants not profitable, declining margins. To me, the other half of this story is about how restaurants as brands are transitioning into being luxury brands and closer to fashion houses and apparel companies and lifestyle brands than ever before. Nobu collaborating with The Gap, John and Vinny's collaborating with Nike, right? Like there's all these examples now of restaurants collaborating, tapping into other industries and making good money doing so. That to me is the ultimate signal that the future is bright, is that restaurants that are standing in the world is starting to get elevated in that way. Developers are throwing money at restaurants. Restaurants are now seen in the real estate business as a great amenity for a residential product or a product to define a neighborhood. That's why the future is bright. But I think the technology question is really interesting. I think we have to keep banging away at technology. I do think technology is part of the solution, but it's as much about harnessing it in the right ways and thinking about that consumer experience as it is anything else.
I've got one last question for you. Um, One of the reasons I like to have you on the show is, when we talk about cracking the code, you build these things for the industry, but you build these things to the benefit of restaurant consumers. And I don't think there's anyone that opens a restaurant that doesn't think like, oh, people will love this. They will love this thing that I made. And you have made things that restaurant consumers love and love at scale to the tune of millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, I guess, if we were to incorporate the data from Eater. And so what is it that you understand about restaurant consumers that you think could be a competitive advantage for people looking to better serve restaurant consumers?
Um, I think it comes down to this. One, restaurants are magical. Restaurants are places that make people happy. And you got to think about them that way. They're entertainment products, they're storytelling products, they're luxury products, but they're places, they're magic. And you shouldn't think of restaurants as commodity. I think when you see like 1,000 restaurants on a map, I think that's a bad product experience. We have to like fundamentally appreciate the role that restaurants play in the world and in people's lives, and that is to create happiness. So that's something that we think about a lot in terms of storytelling, in terms of our relationship with restaurants, in terms of our relationship with customers. There's sort of our informal tagline around here is restaurant lovers unite. And that's everything we do is about uniting the world of restaurant lovers. That's number one. Number two is, and this is more of a product answer, when you're building technology products, you got to appreciate how high the bar is to be successful. Think about the best pieces of technology in your life. They are delivering something that is unbelievably magical every single time you open the app. Whether that's whatever, AI chatbot you're using, whether that's something you mentioned, Uber, whether that's the Starbucks app, the apps that are dominating, that are winning, the bar is magic. The bar is magic. And if you're not building to that same bar, you've got no prayer. It's not going to work. So number one is restaurant lovers unite, and that drives everything we do. Number two is we know that we have to build a product that is going to deliver magic from a technology standpoint. And if we do, we've got a shot. And if we don't, we're just going to be in a sea of apps that fail.